The screen crackles with sound. Alex Jones is already at full volume, his voice ricocheting off the studio walls like cannon fire. He leans forward, face flushed, veins straining as he hurls accusation after accusation. They're lying to you, they're stealing your freedoms. The whole system is rigged by elites who want to control your every move. His fists slam the table, his eyes wild with fury. To his loyal audience, this chaos is familiar, comforting even. To anyone else, it feels like a storm that never ends. But then freeze. The roar cuts to silence. The image of Jones frozen mid-yell, mouth wide, eyes blazing. A narrator's voice slices through the static, but he had no idea what was coming next, because across from him, quiet but steady, sits Representative Jasmine Crockett. No pounding fists, no red face, no chaos, just a sharp, unflinching stare that could cut through the noise. She waits, letting him burn himself out, the way fire consumes its own oxygen. The contrast is electric. He thrives on disorder. She on composure. He raises his voice to win. She lowers hers to command. The cameras catcheth the micro smile at the corner of her lips, the patience in her eyes. She knows what's coming. The audience doesn't. Not yet, but the tension is thick. Enough to taste. For years, Jones has barked unchecked. For years, he has spread conspiracies and reveled in outrage. And now, sitting across from him, is someone he cannot rattle. Someone who has built her entire career on clarity, discipline, and truth. As Jones barrels on, Crockett finally shifts in her chair. A small motion, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a ripple through the room. She's not raising her hand. She's not demanding attention. She doesn't have to. The silence gathering around her presence speaks louder than any shout. That's when the storm begins to break. The camera lingers on Jones's flushed face, then cuts back to Crockett's calm gaze. She draws in a breath, measured and precise, the way a surgeon steadies before the first incision, and with one sentence. She left him unraveling on his own stage. Alex Jones doesn't just shout into a microphone, he commands an empire built on rage. His voice reaches millions, pouring gasoline on fear and suspicion, convincing people that shadows are monsters and lies are revelations. He tells his audience that the government wants to steal their children, that tragedies are staged, that enemies lurk in every corner. For years, these claims have traveled far beyond his studio walls. They've infiltrated living rooms, community meetings, and even political debates, reshaping the way countless Americans see the world. That's why this moment matters. This isn't just a loud man throwing tantrums into the void. This is someone who has monetized chaos, weaponized paranoia, and convinced followers that truth itself is negotiable. Every outburst carries a ripple effect. Every conspiracy can inspire action, sometimes violent, sometimes devastating. To let these lies stand unchallenged is to watch the very fabric of trust unravel. But sitting across from him now is someone who refuses to let lies slide by. Jasmine Crockett didn't stumble into this confrontation. She arrived with a reputation already etched into the political landscape, sharp, fearless, and unyielding. A lawyer by training, a public servant by calling, she has built her name on exposing contradictions and standing firm when others would back down. She doesn't trade in theater, she deals in evidence, clarity, and accountability. Her calm isn't weakness, it's her weapon. Her story is not one of privilege, but of persistence. She's the product of long hours, hard battles, and communities that demanded better. Crockett knows what it's like to be underestimated. She knows the sting of being dismissed, the sneer of those who mistake composure for softness, and she's turned every one of those dismissals into fuel. When she speaks, she carries the weight of that struggle, and the dignity of the people who believe in her fight. Now those two forces, chaos and clarity, sit across from each other, live on air. It's a collision years in the making. Jones, with his empire of noise, thrives on breaking his opponents, throwing them off balance until they sputter or retreat. Crockett, however, has no intention of retreating. Her silence alone unsettles him, because silence from her isn't strategy. The stakes could not be higher. Millions are watching, some loyal to Jones, others weary of his bluster, and many waiting to see if anyone can finally pierce through his wall of sound. They lean in, not knowing what's about to unfold, because what happens when chaos meets calm? What happens when lies crash into facts delivered with unflinching resolve? That answer was about to play out in real time, and it would leave a mark far beyond the walls of this studio. Millions would soon see what happens when chaos meets calm. To understand the chaos that erupted on that stage, you have to understand Alex Jones. For decades, he has been more than a talk show host. He's been a ringleader of outrage, a salesman of paranoia, and a performer who knows that volume can be mistaken for conviction. His empire wasn't built on quiet persuasion or careful argument, it was built on spectacle, and spectacle was his weapon of choice. Jones first drew attention with claims that shadowy forces were plotting to enslave America. He painted global institutions as sinister puppet masters, every tragedy as a staged performance, every crisis as a conspiracy. When children were slaughtered at Sandy Hook Elementary, most of the nation grieved. Jones, however, called it a hoax. He told his audience that grieving parents were crisis actors, a grotesque fabrication that tormented families already shattered by loss. His lies gave rise to harassment campaigns, death threats, and years of additional suffering for those who had buried their children, and yet, his audience grew, because Jones understood the mechanics of fear. He knew that if you shout louder than anyone else, some people will confuse your noise for truth. He knew that if you wrap paranoia in patriotism, followers will march with you. Arrogance became his armor, bluster became his brand. In his world, decency was weakness, reflection was irrelevant. All that mattered was the next rant, the next viral clip, the next chance to drown reason in a flood of fury. He would slam desks, rip papers, point fingers at the camera as if he were a general commanding troops. To his fans, this wasn't performance, it was passion. They mistook his theatrics for authenticity, not realizing that every outburst was carefully calibrated to stir loyalty and, just as importantly, to sell. Because behind the thunder, there was always the transaction. Jones profited from the fear. He stoked supplements, survival gear, doomsday prep kits. His conspiracies weren't just beliefs, they were marketing strategies. Every terrifying claim came with a solution available on his website. Every rant ended with a call to buy something that promised safety from the chaos he swore was closing in. It wasn't just lies, it was an entire business model built on monetizing panic. Still, his arrogance went beyond the studio. He swaggered into courtrooms, brushing off lawsuits with the same bravado he used on air. He mocked judges, dismissed journalists, and doubled down on claims even after being confronted with evidence. He seemed untouchable, immune to shame, immune to consequence. His survival depended on keeping the volume up and the spotlight fixed squarely on him, but strip away the noise and what remains, a hollow core. A man whose power evaporates the moment he faces someone who refuses to play his game. Jones's fury is effective against those who fear looking weak. His bluster thrives against those who stumble when interrupted. But when his opponent is calm, when his opponent waits patiently with facts in hand, his arsenal starts to collapse. Without the distraction of volume, his words reveal themselves for what they are: empty, desperate, and fragile. That's the secret of his playbook. Theatrics without substance, noise without weight. And for years, it worked because no one with a platform big enough had stood firmly across from him and refused to be shaken. But that day, sitting across from him under the hot studio lights, was Jasmine Crockett, a woman who had endured storms far greater than his, a woman who had no need to match his volume, because truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. She came armed not with bluster but with clarity, the very thing his empire could not withstand, and for the first time, Alex Jones's bluster was about to collide with someone he couldn't bulldoze. Jasmine Crockett's story does not begin in front of cameras or beneath the glow of studio lights. It begins in neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce but determination ran deep. Raised in a world that demanded resilience, she learned early that silence in the face of injustice was not an option. She carried with her the lessons of a community that had been overlooked, underestimated, and yet refused to give up its dignity. That grounding became the foundation of everything she would later become: a lawyer, a legislator, and a voice that could not be ignored. Her legal career was not built in ivory towers, but in courtrooms where the stakes were often life or death. As a public defender, Crockett stood beside those society was quick to discard. She fought for people whose names would never make the news, for defendants who could not afford the protection of wealth or influence. Every case sharpened her mind and her instincts. She learned to find cracks in arguments, to expose contradictions with precision, to dismantle arrogance with the cold, hard weight of fact, where others saw hopeless causes. She saw human beings worth defending, and in every battle she carried the conviction that justice was not just a word in the Constitution but a promise meant to be kept. Her path to politics was born from the same fire. Crockett did not enter public life for vanity or status. She entered because she saw that the courtroom, though vital, was only one arena. To change the conditions that put so many lives at risk, she had to fight the system itself. And so she stepped into the political arena, carrying with her the armor of experience and the scars of 1,000 battles already fought. Naive about the cruelty of politics, she had seen the cruelty of life. That is why she never flinched. In office, her reputation grew quickly. She was unafraid to speak truth to power, unafraid to call out hypocrisy even when it came wrapped in tradition or authority. Her words cut through the haze of doublespeak because they were anchored in something stronger than ambition. They were anchored in lived experience. She knew what it meant to stand in court beside someone with nothing left to lose. She knew what it meant to look injustice in the eye and refuse to back down. That clarity made her formidable, but what made her extraordinary was not only her sharp legal mind, it was her resilience. Time and again, Crockett faced the sneers of those who doubted her, the dismissals of those who mistook calm for weakness. Each insult became another layer of armor, another reason to push forward. She didn't need to shout to be heard, because she understood that authority is not measured in decibels but in conviction. Her composure wasn't silenced. It was strength refined over years of trial by fire. And so, when she found herself preparing to face Alex Jones, she wasn't stepping into foreign territory. She had faced louder voices before. She had faced more dangerous lies before. His theatrics, his bluster, these were nothing compared to the battles she had already fought. He was just another man who believed volume could replace truth. What he didn't realize was that she had been preparing for him her entire life. Her supporters knew this. To them, Crockett represented more than a politician. She was proof that dignity could rise out of struggle, that strength could wear the face of compassion, and that truth could still stand tall in an era of distortion. She became a symbol for those who had been told to sit down, to stay quiet, to stop asking questions. Every time she spoke, she reminded them that their voices mattered too. That was the energy she carried with her into the studio. As Jones paced his stage, ready to bulldoze with volume, Crockett arrived with a weapon far more dangerous to his empire: composure. She had no need for theatrics because her very presence was the antithesis of his. Where he represented chaos, she embodied discipline. Where he shouted to cover emptiness, she spoke to reveal substance. She wasn't just a guest on his show, she was the reckoning he had long avoided. And the reckoning wasn't loud or brash. It was measured, unyielding, and rooted in a lifetime of service. The audience didn't know it yet, but the moment Crockett walked onto that set, the battle was already shifting. Because she wasn't there to trade insults. She was there to reveal the truth. When she walked onto that set, she carried not just facts but a lifetime of fighting for truth. The cameras rolled, the red light beaming, and from the very first moment Alex Jones was relentless. He came out swinging with words designed to overwhelm. His voice a tidal wave meant to drown any attempt at reason. "You're lying to the American people," he shouted, stabbing the air with his finger. "You and your party are selling this country to globalists who want to destroy everything our forefathers built." The desk shook under his fists, his voice pitched high with rage. Crockett sat across from him, unblinking. Not once did she flinch as his words filled the air like gunfire. She knew his strategy was the same one he had used for years. Interrupt, mock, drown the opponent in noise until the audience can no longer distinguish rant from reality. He barked out half-baked statistics, twisted anecdotes, even flat-out falsehoods, each delivered with the confidence of a preacher in full revival mode. But Crockett did not interrupt. She didn't try to shout over him. Instead she let him keep talking. The louder he became, the quieter she appeared. Her hands folded loosely in her lap, her gaze steady, her silence radiating authority. It was infuriating to him, intoxicating. To those watching, the contrast was stark. A man unraveling in desperation versus a woman who understood that control was its own form of power. He ridiculed her appearance, mocked her career, even sneered at her intelligence. "You think you're so smart, but you're just another puppet reading off the script they hand you." His words dripped with contempt, but his eyes darted nervously when she didn't react. The silence between his outbursts began to feel heavier, more dangerous than anything she had yet said. The tension in the studio was palpable. Producers behind the glass exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene. Viewers at home leaned forward, some cheering his fury, others marveling at her restraint. Every second felt like a contest of wills. Jones hurled insults, but composure stole the air out of his lungs. And then came the boiling point. He rose halfway out of his chair, his voice breaking into a knit. "Answer me, admit the truth. You're lying, you're all liars." His arms flailed, his face glistened with sweat. He was no longer in control of his performance, it was controlling him. Crockett simply tilted her head, a small motion but devastating in its impact. It said without words, "Are you finished?" For the first time, the studio fell quiet. The storm had burned itself out, if only for a moment. Jones, panting, his chest heaving, finally sat back down. The cameras zoomed in on Crockett, waiting. The audience held its breath, sensing that something was about to shift. And then she spoke. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade through glass, not loud, not hurried, but sharp and deliberate. "Alex," she began, her tone steady, "you've made a career out of scaring people, but tonight, you're not scaring me, you're just exposing yourself." The words landed with the force of a hammer wrapped in velvet, calm, precise, irrefutable. Jones blinked, caught off guard. By the softness of her delivery, he leaned forward, ready to pounce, but she didn't give him the opening he craved. She moved quickly, her rhythm like a trial lawyer dismantling a hostile witness. "You said the election was stolen," she continued, eyes locked on him. "But court after court, Republican-appointed judges, Trump-appointed judges. Those claims, not because of politics, but because there was no evidence, none. You told your listeners they were cheated. The truth is, you cheated them by lying." The studio air tightened. Jones shifted in his chair, his mouth twitching, eager to interrupt. But Crockett pressed on. "You said parents at Sandy Hook were actors. They buried their children. Alex, real children. You turned their grief into your circus. And now you owe them more than money. You owe them the dignity you stole." Gasps erupted from the control room, even though no microphones picked them up. On screen, Jones tried to cut in, stammering, "That's out of context," but Crockett raised a hand, steady, not aggressive. It was the universal gesture of a teacher silencing a noisy classroom, and it worked. He froze. She leaned forward, just slightly, enough to shift the power in the room. "He said vaccines were killing people, that the government was poisoning them. But Alex, millions of Americans are alive today because they got that shot. Meanwhile, your store was selling supplements you claimed would protect people. You didn't just lie, you cashed in on those lies." The camera cut to Jones's face. His jaw clenched, his lips curled into a defensive sneer, but his eyes darted. He wasn't in control anymore. The rhythm belonged to her. Crockett paused, letting the silence stretch, her composure now the loudest sound in the room. Then she delivered the coup de grace. "You call yourself a patriot, but a patriot doesn't prey on his own people. A patriot doesn't profit from their pain. That's not patriotism, that's exploitation." The words struck with surgical precision. Jones slammed his hand on the table, his voice booming in desperation. "That's a lie. This is a setup. You're twisting everything." His voice cracked. His volume betrayed him. He wasn't roaring anymore, he was rattled. Crockett didn't blink. "If it's a setup, Alex, it's one you built yourself, brick by brick, lie by lie." For a moment, the great Alex Jones had no words. His empire of noise faltered against the simplest, quietest truth. The silence that followed wasn't her weakness, it was his dot. And then, as if to prove he still had control, Jones lunged back in with another rant. He barked about globalists, about plots, about media manipulation. His hands flailed, his voice climbed higher, but it sounded less like conviction and more like panic. The audience could see it. A man unraveling, out of weapons, swinging blindly. Crockett waited, patient as a stormbreaker against crashing waves. When he finally paused for breath, she delivered her final blow. "Alex, every time you scream, you prove my point. You want volume to be truth, but truth doesn't need to scream. Truth stands on its own." The studio fell silent again. This time the silence wasn't forced, it was reverent. Even Jones's most loyal viewers watching at home couldn't ignore the shift. The man who built an empire on being untouchable looked, for the first time, exposed. Jones sputtered, You don't get it. People love me, they know I'm right." His voice cracked again, betraying the desperation beneath the words. Crockett tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Love built on lies isn't love, Alex. It's manipulation. And eventually, even your audience deserves better." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. Not shouted, not demanded, delivered. Final dot. The camera caught the sweat glistening on Jones's forehead, the uneasy fidget of his hands. It tried to summon another tirade, another insult, another performance, but nothing landed. He was a fighter, swinging in the dark, every punch hitting empty space. Crockett leaned back in her chair, calmed, unshaken. She didn't need to say more. She had already done what no one before her had managed. She dismantled Alex Jones on his own stage, with his own audience watching. The control room was breathless. Producers whispered to one another, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Viewers at home began reaching for their phones, clipping the moment, preparing to share it before the segment was even over, and then the cameras lingered on Jones one last time, his face caught between fury and defeat. He had ranted, he had screamed, he had thrown everything in his arsenal, and none of it had worked, because Crockett had shown that the loudest man in the room can still be the weakest. That truth, when wielded with discipline and calm, doesn't just counter lies, it destroys them. The final shot of the segment captured it perfectly. Jones slumped back in his chair, his empire of noise cracking around him, while Crockett sat poised, the very image of control. The internet would explode within minutes. The clip hit the internet before the studio lights had even cooled. Someone in the control room had already sliced it down to 30 seconds, the moment Jasmine Crockett stared Alex Jones down, dismantled his lies, and left him sputtering. That clip spread like wildfire, bouncing across timelines, group chats, and news feeds with dizzying speed. Within an hour, hashtags were trending. #.com crushes chaos. #Crockett vs Jones. #facts over fear. Viewers couldn't get enough. Some shared the clip with captions like, "This is how you handle bullies." Others wrote, "The moment truth finally shut down the circus." The contrast was impossible to miss. Jones red-faced and flailing, versus Crockett, measured and unbuttoned. The internet has always loved a takedown, but this wasn't just any takedown, it was the slaying of a giant on his own turf. Memes poured in by the thousands. One showed Jones mid-yell with the caption, "Sound and fury," signifying nothing, while Crockett's calm gaze was paired with, "And yet, she persisted." Another meme looped Jones's face, crumbling into silence with the text, "When the substitute teacher actually knows the lesson plan." TikTok users layered her one-liners over dramatic soundtracks, turning the exchange into mini-movies. Even late-night comedians couldn't resist. By evening, monologues across networks opened with jokes about Alex Jones losing to a whisper, but praise didn't come only from the predictable corners. Figures who had once kept their distance from Crockett now spoke with admiration. A retired general tweeted, "Composure under fire. That's leadership." A popular conservative commentator, though not aligned with her politics, admitted on air, "Jones looked out of control. Crockett looked like an adult." There's no denying who won that exchange. Celebrities chimed in. An Oscar-winning actress shared the clip on Instagram with the caption, "Women like this make me proud." Musicians posted reaction videos, mouths hanging open at Crockett's.com dismantling of Jones's empire of noise. Athletes reposted it, praising her discipline under pressure. Even faith leaders weighed in, comparing her composure to biblical parables of truth outlasting arrogance. And while Jones's loyalists tried to spin it, the narrative slipped out of their hands. They flooded forums claiming the video was edited or that the media twisted it. But those excuses collapsed under the sheer volume of raw footage circulating online. No matter how they spun it, the images spoke louder than their words. Jones ranting, Crockett calmly dismantling him, Jones unraveling. Mainstream outlets couldn't ignore it either. Headlines declared, "Crockett silences Jones with surgical precision." "The day calm beat chaos, Jones meets his match." Editorial boards praised Crockett for showing how dignity can be power. Analysts noted how rare it was to see Jones so visibly rattled, especially in his own domain. The story wasn't just political gossip anymore, it was cultural theater. In living rooms across the country, families replayed the clip. Some who had never heard of Crockett before now saw her as a household name. Parents pointed her out to their children as an example of how to stand firm without stooping to anger. Young people turned her into a symbol of resilience, someone who proved that you don't need to scream to be heard. The shockwaves reached Jones's own audience too. Some remained fiercely loyal, doubling down on his conspiracies, but others began to question. Forum posts popped up asking, why did he look so rattled? Why didn't he have answers? A few even admitted, quietly, that Crockett had made him look weaker than they'd ever seen him. The ripple effect was undeniable. Social media had crowned a new icon of composure, and the story was no longer just about a viral clip. It was about a shift in the way people talked about truth and lies, chaos and calm, arrogance and dignity. And yet, as powerful as the online firestorm was, its true weight wasn't measured in hashtags or headlines. Because beyond the memes, beyond the jokes and the viral edits, something deeper was stirring. But the real impact wasn't online, it was deeper. When the shouting had faded and the viral storm settled into clarity, Jasmine Crockett's victory wasn't measured in decibels or headlines. It was measured in the lesson her composure had carved into the public consciousness, that truth does not need to shout, and dignity does not need to bend. In a world addicted to outrage, she reminded millions that calm is not weakness, it is strength in its purest form. Her exchange with Alex Jones was never just about two people locked in a studio battle. It was about two visions of America. On one side stood chaos, loud, erratic, fueled by fear and conspiracy, demanding attention but offering nothing of substance. On the other side stood calm resolve, grounded in facts, rooted in service, unwilling to be shaken by insult or noise. The contrast could not have been sharper for decades. Figures like Jones have thrived on the belief that volume equals power, that if you can shout louder than the truth, you can rewrite it. But Crockett proved otherwise. With every calm correction, with every unshaken gaze, she revealed that bluster without substance collapses under its own weight. She didn't just silence Jones. She exposed the emptiness of his performance, and in doing so, she offered the audience something far more valuable than a takedown. She offered a roadmap for how to face arrogance in their own lives. The lesson reached beyond politics. It spoke to classrooms where students face bullies, workplaces where integrity is tested, dinner tables where difficult conversations unfold. Crockett's message was universal. You do not have to match chaos with chaos. You can hold your ground with clarity, with dignity, with truth. That is how real battles are won. Her composure turned into a mirror for the nation. At a time when American discourse feels louder and meaner than ever, her restraint showed that noise is not destiny. The cultural struggle we face between truth and lies, between respect and derision, between chaos and calm can be won not with more shouting, but with the steady courage to stay grounded in what is real. And that courage isn't reserved for politicians or public figures. It belongs to everyone who chooses not to be baited into anger, everyone who refuses to surrender their dignity to someone else's performance. Crockett's victory was personal, yes, but it was also collective. It was a reminder that dignity is contagious, that one person's refusal to be rattled can ripple outward and inspire countless others. The arc of her confrontation bent toward something larger than herself. In that studio, she embodied resilience shaped by years of service, sharpened by legal battles, and strengthened by community. She showed that the real measure of power is not how loud you can scream, but how unshakably you can stand. And that lesson, once seen, is impossible to unsee. By the time the dust settled, it was no longer just Crockett versus Jones. It was a parable of America itself, a choice between being consumed by chaos or reclaiming the calm that allows truth to speak. And in that parable, millions found themselves on the side of calm, on the side of truth, on the side of dignity. Her words still echo. Truth doesn't need to scream. And in an age of endless noise, that truth became revolutionary, because Crockett didn't just win an argument, she modeled a way forward. She showed that resilience, composure, and dignity will always outlast arrogance, fear, and lies. And for a nation longing for clarity, her victory felt like more than a moment. It felt like a map. Alex Jones went nuts. He screamed, he ranted, he threw every ounce of chaos he could summon, but none of it mattered, because Jasmine Crockett didn't need to shout. She didn't need to match his fury. With calm, steady truth, she exposed him right there, live on air for exactly what he was. And that's the lesson at the heart of this story. Noise may grab attention, but it cannot outlast dignity. Lies may shake the moment, but they cannot survive the weight of truth. Jones's meltdown was dramatic, yes, but Crockett's composure was unforgettable. In the end, her strength wasn't in raising her voice, it was in refusing to be moved by his. That contrast is more than entertainment, it's a blueprint. In our own lives, we face voices like Jones's, loud, manipulative, desperate for dominance, and like Crockett, we each have the choice to stand our ground, to answer chaos with calm, to let truth not volume carry the day. So, if this moment struck you, if you saw in Crockett's composure the kind of strength America needs more of, then don't let it stop here. Share this story, pass it on. Let others see what it looks like when calm dismantles chaos. And if you want more stories like this, myths where dignity rises above arrogance, where truth outlasts noise, then hit subscribe. Be part of a community that refuses to bow to lies, that chooses calm strength over empty bluster, because Crockett's victory wasn't just hers. It was a reminder of what we all carry within us, the power to stand tall, to stay steady, and to let truth speak louder than any scream. Stand for calm strength. The world is watching.